the value of truth, the purpose of AI, and why separating entrepreneurs and scholars will have fools do the thinking and cowards do the innovation. This is not Imran podcast. It's July 12, 2025. This is Gödel. For the year, we're down 15%. The market's up 6%. We're underperforming by 21%. So I want to talk about the value of truth, the genealogy of truth, which is tightly related to the value of the moral codex that we live in, and inspired by Nietzsche. I just came back from Sils Maria, where I spent 2 days hiking. Beautiful place, highly recommended, and of course inspiring because Friedrich Nietzsche wrote some of his most important work there. Now, one of the things that I personally really like about Nietzsche is the question that he asks, which is, what is actually the value of truth? And I want to talk about this because sometimes we get sort of boggled down in the trees and we don't see the forest anymore. We talk about the value of AI. We talk about morals. We talk about what's fair. We talk about what's a good society. And we talk about truth and misinformation. The French President Emmanuel Macron just recently gave a speech where he said he wants to protect Europe from misinformation. So that implies, of course, an understanding of truth and also the willingness to protect it, which in principle I am in favor of. Of course, in practical terms, I'm highly opposed to the approach that Macron is taking, which is, of course, he or his disciples decide, in reality, it's the European bureaucracy which decides what is true and then censors everything else, which of course is a terrible outcome. And that's where, the EU is being stuck in right now. But having said that, what is the value of truth? And I want to tie it closely to AI because, like many things, this AI revolution that we're going through right now, this big bang of AI, as Elon Musk calls it, is opening up our eyes to many, many questions. And one of them is the value of truth. And in a sense, you can say, well, what is the value of truth? It's maybe just a construct. Maybe it's just something that the Western culture, embedded in Judeo-Christian values, has come up with to justify their dominance. That will be a postmodern relativistic argument. Or you can use the actual Christian argument and say, well, the truth is what's in the Bible, and God and Jesus, his son, they are here to tell us about the truth. Now, I don't believe in either of those interpretations of the truth. And I think that's already a big statement I made because I used the word believe. So when we talk about truth, we fall into the belief system, which is almost an oxymoron. But ever since Gödel, I think a clear fact, which is that there is actually no such thing as truth, because even true statements cannot be proven, and therefore we cannot be sure about their true validity in principle. Does that mean we should throw truth overboard? Does that mean we should fall into a relativistic nightmare? Of course not. That doesn't work. We've tried it actually in communism. We've tried it in the French Revolution. We've tried it in the second half of the 20th century. We're trying it now with the woke virus, and the EU is a good manifestation, as well as the Chinese Communist Party, which unfortunately are kind of almost asymptotically similar now, just from different sides. One comes from liberty, the other comes from totalitarianism, but they're kind of merging into the same type of pseudo-capitalistic, censored, top-down, central regimen. Having said that, what is the value of truth? I think we're Popperian here at Orange Capital Partners. We do abide to the doctrine of criticism and the questioning of finding better solutions for problems. And that's the value of truth. When Musk says that he wants to have his AI be maximum truth-seeking, I think he's using his words very carefully. maximum truth seeking doesn't mean truth seeking. It just means it's what Popper used to call verisimilitude, which is an unfortunate word, but it just means that there is something out there, an objective truth. There is something out there, at least something that we humans perceive as objective truth, as proven in things like beauty, as proven in things like David Deutsch calls the trash can of a composer. So compositions are either beautiful or they're not beautiful, and we can tell the difference because when we work on them, we criticize them, we try new ways, we error correct. Error correction by definition requires an approach towards an objective truth, and we can only error correct if there is something to strive towards. So there's an objective truth out there. Also in physics, Susskind at Stanford talks about a potential of a holographic universe where we just see a certain representation of reality, and the reality is very different. We also have Plato's, gorge fire thing, das Höhlengleichnis in German. I don't know the English professional expression where he talks about the idea that we just see shadows of reality and the real reality is very different. So there's a lot of approximations to this concept of truth, but I think fundamentally the value of truth is to have a compass, to have a guideline which constrains us towards acting in a certain way. So in other words, if you run a company, let's say like X or Meta or Google, I think you're better served in the end by having a maximally truth-seeking algorithm as a company philosophy. Simply because if you don't, you run the risk of anarchy. And anarchy in a legal sense, but also anarchy in a behavioral sense. You don't want everybody to follow their own perspective and their own views. Now, that's an optimization problem. I just want to caveat this right away. I'm a big proponent of freedom of speech, freedom of thought. So that of course is a very fine line between everybody expressing their views about something and having maximally truth-seeking algorithm, because how do we know that Joni has an idea that we dismiss because it's not true? How do we know that? How do we let Janie express herself freely to the point where she might actually undo a project? Maybe she's right. So how do we know these things? And that's, of course, a much, much deeper question, and it comes to execution. So I don't want to mix these things up. So the value of truth is to have a North Star, to have a certain way of behavior that approximates the values that we want to optimize ourselves towards. While the way we actually do this, that is, in my opinion, much more difficult question to answer. In other words, how we actually do this. That is certainly much more difficult to answer. But again, fundamentally, the value of truth is to have a certain compass, a certain way of behavior, a certain matrix of possible actions that will yield towards better results. And it's, of course, that's the value of an entrepreneur, of a CEO, is to set the reward functions, if you will, if you want to use the reinforcement learning analogy, to set the reward functions in such a way that the system approach truth seeking is maximized. Focus on truth seeking, not truth itself. We're Gödelian in that sense. We don't assume, we don't have the audacity to believe that we can find the truth, but we can engage in truth seeking. And for all those who question that, there's people who say, well, how can you, there's no such thing, and Gödel said, and blah, blah, blah. Here's the thing. We actually have a very good test case of truth seeking, and that's called science, particularly natural science, STEM.
So STEM fields, such as physics, particularly, and other fields in STEM, they are maximum truth seeking because they are evaluating themselves against nature. Nature is a fantastic oracle telling us what's up and what works and what doesn't work. So that's why even in physics and chemistry and those types of areas, even though there is some politics there, of course, like everywhere else where humans are involved, there is much less of it than in, let's say, social sciences, because simply we calibrate ourselves against reality. And I think I paraphrased Elon Musk here in his presentation of Grok 4 when he said that the ultimate reward function that will bring us to a maximum step function in AI is going to be reality. So that is the reward functions that matters the most. So if we want to build better models for technology, physics, if we want to build better models to build AI for arts, models to build AI for medicine, or any kind of endeavor, any kind of problem that human beings are facing, then the best way to proceed is to try to calibrate them with reality. In other words, reality is the best reward function. And the best AI companies of the future are those that can incorporate reality as a reward function for their AI models. Now, that doesn't solve, of course, the data problem, which is also a real problem. For example, in the arts, you could argue that how do you actually teach a model of how to become better at calibrating itself against reality and produce better art as tested in the real world. In other words, let's say in the art case, art that actually appeals to people, that people are willing to pay for, and so on and so forth. How do you do that? Well, you have to train these models. You're going to need data. The data is going to be borrowed from maybe real artists, and they need to be, of course, compensated for that. And that's a whole different question. But we here at Launch Capital Partners are in favor of compensating anybody who wants to contribute towards the building of AI models, whether it's the data side or the model side. As a final thought, I just want to talk about the data here a little bit more. For example, when we say that reality is the best reward function, we also have to be very conscious about the fact that we need to have a data pipeline. People don't think too much about this right now. Everybody's entangled in the model space and how to build these fancy models and math and all of that, and that's very important. But the key to successful AI in the future is, like Elon Musk said, the calibration of AI in the real world. In other words, the robots will be the data gathering engine for the future AIs. Now, in order to bootstrap that, we need some sort of data. So if we want to have a robot that actually is able to build a sculpture, then we need to sort of calibrate the thing somewhere first in order for the thing to learn and get better. And that calibration needs to happen in a data pipeline. Or maybe to use a more tangible example, if we want to build a model that can come up with new physics and new science, we need to have a data pipeline of how science is being done, at least in rudimentary terms, because you can, in principle, of course, have the system do science in self-play and figure out over time in self-play what good science is. And maybe that is an approach that is tangible in the sort of long term. But for now, I think we need to have a data pipeline that mimics itself against human scientists, at least for now. And that involves building, let's say, logs about science projects, logs about labs and how they operate, so that the data models can be fed, those data can be fed into the models and learn. Now, again, eventually we might actually have AlphaGo Zero type approaches towards science, towards arts. We're not there yet. That's probably going to be the long-term end game here. And that's, I think, where people like Musk see this enormous potential for the future. For now, I think we are still in the world of, okay, how do we get enough expert data fed into the model so they can learn and bootstrap themselves? To summarize, in summary, I think the value of truth is as a calibration tool, as a reward function design tool for AI. That's the fundamental value. I think the experts of the future are those who train the AI models, who teach them. So whether you're an artist or a physics person or a doctor, your main job will be to be a teacher and train the AI to actually do the kind of work that you've been doing so far, and then hopefully also can inspire you and other AIs to do even more important work. But fundamentally, I guess the most important thing is the value of truth is as a calibration tool, as an evaluation tool, and now in itself, truth also is an expanding project, as Gödel said. So we need to be very conscious about that. But we can still, even through criticizing truth, stick with some things that work, and then, of course, improve the ones that don't work so well. Thank you.